if you're growing people in your discipleship model, right? After 9 years, what would your expectation be for all those things? We should have more people serving. We should have more people giving. We should have more people sharing their faith. We should have more people attending. All our numbers were going down. And that said to me, you know what? And this was a huge revelation to me. That said to me, our discipleship model is messed up. And that's when I went back and I started really studying Wesley really hard. And I realized, you know what? We're doing this additive model of discipleship. And Wesley had this holistic model. And it's a totally different way of looking at how you disciple people. And it made a huge difference. And it took us about 2 years to start to get that philosophy turned around in our church. And look what happened, after we did that.
Can you say a little bit more about getting the people turned around in that from one model to another?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question is about how we got people turned around from one model to the other. The biggest obstacle in that at that point was our staff. Because our staff had built this model of discipleship that our church family was, living out. And they owned it, and they were bought into it, and they believed it. And all of a sudden I came back to them and I said, you know what, this isn't working. And I was a part of it too. I've been invested in it for 10 years just like they had. It's really hard to go back and after you've built something for 10 years, say, wow, that was a mistake.
Yeah. What were we thinking?
Especially when you had success for 9 years.
Yes. That's exactly right. When you've been successful for a long time with it, to go back and say, well, that was a mistake. And in actuality, 2 of our staff people left. One of them, I ended up almost firing. They resigned the day that I was going to fire them. And one other person ended up leaving as well because they just couldn't make that transition, and we had to bring in some other people that were kind of bought into the new model of what we were doing. The church family as a whole, the lay leaders, it made sense to them, the new model. When we started explaining, this is how you grow as a human being, that made sense to them.
Right.
So for them, it was easier. But for those of us who had invested in this system for 10 years, pouring our lives into it, it was hard to let that go.
Sure.
That was hard.
What do you contribute then to the growth in those 9 years when you were following the old model?
Well, the old model works to a point, but when you get far enough along into it, after 6, 7, 8, 9 years, what I discovered is that everything that I thought should be happening with our people wasn't. And so, we were doing other things well too. That's not the only thing that grows a church. I mean, you have to do quality worship, you have to do, there's a lot of pieces that go into growing a church. It's not just what you're doing discipleship-wise. So we were doing all those pieces as well. And that's part of the reason why we were growing. But it didn't really create the kind of disciples that I wanted to create. And what's the mission of the church? To do what? Make disciples. Yeah. So if that's what we're trying to do, then bottom line, Kevin says, it's all, we got all these numbers that we got to report. Well, the bottom line is that that's hard to be held accountable to those numbers. But if what we're doing isn't moving us in the direction that we think we should be going, then we got to change. We got to do something different.
Which books by Wesley or on Wesley did you find most helpful in terms of finding a new holistic model?
That's a great question. Here's what I did when I was having this crisis of ministry faith, which is what it was. It was heartbreaking for me. I called 5 seminaries, and I said,
You haven't called us, have you?
I didn't call Methesco, but I called 5 seminaries, And I said, tell me what are the best books that you know of on Wesley out there. And I got 2 or 3, and I'll have to get I can't even, this was a couple years back, so I have to go back and look at the names of the books. But I remember one of them wasn't even a book out. It was the doctoral thesis that he had put together, and that was actually the best one that I had. And went through and looked at it and just read through that. It was a terrible read because it was a doctoral thesis. It wasn't a published book, but it was probably the best. And I'll have to go back and look because I can't remember who it was that had written that, or even what seminary it was from. But that's what I did. I ordered these 2 or 3, 4 books, and I started studying. I did a lot of study on the internet. There's all kinds of information out there on the internet to kind of pull all that together. And I'll need to get those references. I can get that. I can figure out what that is, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And actually, I'm going to share next some of what I learned through all that. Here's an interesting thing. Peace went through a same 14% decline in 04 through 06. I don't believe they ever reevaluated why they dropped in attendance. All they did was they were bleeding, and they put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding, right? And then the bleeding stopped, and they said, "Oh, the bleeding stopped." And that's, yeah. What was the tourniquet? Oh, that's a good question. The tourniquet was, the church was, I believe the reason the church did this decline was that the church has been a medium-sized church, and they've never transitioned into a large church. There's different expectations, different organizational structures, all those kinds of things. So they were on the edge of trying to become a large church, but they never made any of the organizational shifts to become a large church, so it pushed them right back down to a medium-sized church. The tourniquet they put on was to, when they were losing money, they were losing attendance, and the staff, the pastor, the staff wasn't doing that. The administrative board came in and said, we're taking control, because if somebody doesn't take control of this sucker, we're going to lose the church, right? And so when I got there, 6 years later, we have a $500,000 budget at Peace Church, and our administrative board has had to approve every expenditure over $500 on a $500,000 budget, even if it was in the budget and already been approved.
Oh my God.
We had to go back through and get it reapproved.
Wow.
Because they were trying to rein in the spending, any spending that was happening.
They'll get that part done.
Well, we've already changed that since I've been there. Because I realized, I said, we are so over micromanaging the decisions and the structure of the church, we can't grow. We're the bottleneck to the growth of the church. And so the tourniquet they put on was to over-control and over-manage and micromanage everything that was happening. And actually they needed to do that at the time, because if they hadn't, it would have created chaos in the church. But they never then, once they got it stabilized, they never then took it off. And second, they never even addressed the reason why they had the collapse in the first place. And so I'm coming in now, and I'm